Welcome back. All right, so I've seen a lot of posts over the last week or so discussing team culture. And it is this nebulous thing that there aren't charts for. And it's interesting, isn't it? So it is, and I don't want to say it measures heart. I don't want to say that because it's getting to the point where that's cliche, right? But it is interesting to see how some franchises, there definitely seems to be a culture issue. Now, how much that has actually to do with the locker room and how much of that has to do with the way the team's put together. Maybe it's the guy behind the bench, right? Maybe they don't like the coach. We've had discussions about teams playing like they want their coach fired. That happens regularly, at least once a year. There's a video I'll have where I'm like, it looks like the team has quit on the coach. You can see it because the coach will either be standing behind the bench yelling and screaming, and the players aren't even reacting. They're just sitting there quietly waiting for the next shift. Or, the coach is animated and he's trying to get a player's attention, and the player's kind of meh about the whole thing. So whether he's yelling on the ice, yelling at the officials, or yelling at the players, they don't care. And the team's in a nosedive. Now, what I've done is I've organized this to look at teams that have missed the playoffs. And again, this is where that old culture thing, and what better place to start than Buffalo? The longest playoff drought, 10 seasons. It's been 14 seasons since they had a series win. So, is there a cultural issue? We've heard that with Buffalo, right? They're trying to change the culture. And you'll hear with Eichel, like, well, he may not want to win badly enough. He may not be the guy. And it's always been interesting to me that this discussion then changes when they finally win. So I'm wearing the Capitals jersey because it's got a big W on the front. And it's a team that lost a lot before they finally won. Detroit, 5 seasons without playoffs. They, of course, are going through a rebuild. Detroit was questioned plenty before their first Stanley Cup. And questions of whether or not enough heart and determination was there. And whether or not they were spending their money properly. And then all of a sudden, they won some Stanley Cups. Good job. Ottawa, 4 seasons since they last made their playoffs. And again, the question with Ottawa becomes, and Ottawa fans, by all means, I know they'll get upset with me for saying it, but the question becomes one of, so when all of these young kids mature and they're owed big money, does Eugene Melnick open up his wallet, or does he say, no, I'll pay for one or two of these guys, I'm not giving them all what they want, and then we go through it again? And whether that's, their second contracts or their third, at some point are we back where we started? And then that would be a team culture that would come down from owner and passed on down. And if Ottawa, did end up in a situation where their current young star players and this really good young team they're putting together ends up being torn apart because money reasons, does that say something about, like, is that part of a culture of a team? And I'm saying that because I keep seeing this, right? So I'm not going to go through every single team on the board here because I don't think that's necessary. Calgary, though. I keep hearing Calgary's culture needs to change. After the season was done, discussions of these guys are pretty comfortable. They're okay with losing. It was a complaint about the Oilers before McDavid really blew up and became the center of the team was the Oilers are okay with losing. The example that I always think of is Moneyball. So the movie Moneyball, which is one of my favorites, one of my favorite scenes, which may never have happened, but it's great Hollywood storytelling, right? Where Brad Pitt, Billy Bean, I'm sure when Billy Bean is, well, they're going to make a movie about you. Can Brad Pitt play me? Really, seriously? Oh my, they did? So if they ever have a movie made about me, I'd be okay with either of the Hemsworths. I'm not picky. So, yeah, it'd be ridiculous. But yeah, the Flames and the idea that maybe they're okay with losing reminds me of that scene in the movie where Billy Bean goes into the locker room and the A's are partying after a loss, and he smashes the boombox and says, that's what losing sounds like. And I think about that when I hear teams are okay with losing. Like, they go out on the ice, they lose the game. Do they just get changed after the game? They go out, they have drinks, and they go, well, that was fun. Well, we didn't win. We might miss the playoffs, but did you see that move I had? Like, and again, there's stories we hear, but we don't hear these stories until guys retire. So we may hear interviews with guys who've retired where we hear these stories about guys who are okay with losing, or guys who maybe tick off the rest of the locker room because the effort's not there. The best example from this season would have been the shift, right? Pierre-Luc Dubois. So any Columbus fan that was like, well, we don't want to lose Dubois, you watch the shift and you go, you know what? He's already quit on the team. So, yeah, we can get rid of him. And is that part of the culture argument? And then when Dubois goes to Winnipeg, a team that has never made the Stanley Cup Finals, what's interesting, too, is the Arizona Coyotes, including the Winnipeg history, that's 41 seasons for Arizona/Winnipeg without a Stanley Cup Final, and 21 seasons for Winnipeg/Atlanta without a Stanley Cup Final. So apparently if your team has played in Winnipeg, now or before, you're not allowed to go to the Stanley Cup Final. But how much of that is a reflection of just the team not being put together correctly? Does that reflect on Cheveldayoff? And again, when we look at the way that these playoffs ended, how much of that gets thrown at Dubois? How much of that is, you know what, if Dubois comes out and plays the way we know he can, maybe they put up more of a fight against Montreal, right? And Montreal's an example of how, because here they are, 2021 finalists, right down near the bottom of the board, and going into the playoffs, it looked like they were probably going to be out quickly against Toronto, and we would have that discussion about how Montreal didn't play very well in the second half of the season. Dominic Ducharme's job would be maybe up in the air, maybe he keeps it, and there would be questions about a lot of the veteran players, and in the cases of some of the free agents that are leaving, it'd be kind of a shrug and, oh well, you know, they lost in the first round against Toronto, so But here we are. They go all the way to the finals. Ducharme is absolutely sticking around as coach, much like the year before Rick Bowness sticks around as coach of Dallas. He was an interim coach, and that's the interesting part with hockey, is that the storyline can change very quickly. So the team that today you look at and you say they don't have the heart to get over the top, tomorrow that may very well change. There's no greater example than the 2018 Cup winner, Washington Capitals. Again, that's why I'm wearing Capitals gear. Because Ovechkin, it was to the point where early on in his career, I used to get a kick out of Washington losing in the playoffs and not being able to get over the top. And I used to be one that I would blame Ovechkin really, really heavily. Eventually, as we get around, I want to say 2015, I stopped. And I said, you know what? Ovechkin, the effort's there. They just aren't putting a solid enough roster around him. 2017, they lost against Pittsburgh, and it felt like Washington was never going to get over the top. Washington had a fantastic 2016-2017 season. The 2017-2018 season wasn't as good for them, regular season-wise, but then in the playoffs, they vanquished Pittsburgh, and next thing you know, they're Stanley Cup champions. And it's interesting because we do hear Minnesota. What are we hearing about right now? They're trying to change the culture on that team. Bill Guerin wants to change the culture on that team. It's been said since he got there. And you'll always hear rumblings about, well, guys may not be getting along in the locker room. I know as a Vancouver fan dating back to the 80s, I've heard rumors about times when the Canucks locker room isn't getting along. I remember when Donald Brashear was traded out of Vancouver, and he didn't say it, but he kind of did. Like, glad I got out of there kind of attitude. Esa Tikkanen was another one that when he left Vancouver, he took some parting shots at the team. And that's something that I know with Vancouver, you're going to have those discussions when your team has never won a championship. When they've been around for over 50 years and they've been in the finals, yes, but they've never got over that hump. And then you get into the discussions of culture and whether or not you can build that successful culture. Going to the Oilers again. After everything got torn down in the early 90s. So it started in the late 80s and the early 90s. The Oilers tear down their dynasty, right? And they became the plucky underdogs that, you know, they put in that effort, but they weren't quite talented enough, but it's okay. And they overcame the low Canadian dollar. They overcame the fact they couldn't afford to pay their guys when their contracts were up. But eventually, that just doesn't work anymore. But what the Oilers kept trying to do was bring in guys who'd been part of that winning Stanley Cup champion dynasty and bring those guys in to kind of prop the team up, and then they thought maybe their success, they'd be able to impart the information that they had that led to their success to the kids, and that these kids or the new players would be able to maybe translate that into success on the ice. I don't know if they just went up to these guys and went, yeah, we had Coffey, we had Gretzky, we had Messier, we had Curry, we had Anderson, we had Fir in net, and Moog was the backup. We had Lowe on the blue line, we had Huddy. Huddy was pretty good. Do we have any of those guys here? No? Well, good luck. All right. Have fun. Because again, there's only so much that you can do with bringing in players from your past, legends from your past. If you don't have that product on the ice, if you don't have a team that's talented enough, all of the discussions of years gone by won't necessarily help you turn things around. And of course, Toronto's an interesting one too. Toronto has become a team that absolutely wins during the regular season. For years now, they've been very good at winning games during the regular season, and they're struggling in playoffs. So the acquisition of Joe Thornton, bringing in Wayne Simmons, having Spezza in that bottom six was meant to, in part, change that culture, right? And bring in that leadership. It's part of the reason the Oilers yesterday make a lot of news in bringing in Duncan Keith. And part of that is, okay, Keith has the 3 cup rings. He's been the best defenseman in the NHL. He's not now. I'm not making the argument he's in right now. But at one point in his career, best defenseman in the NHL. And he likely is going to be able to help that blue line on some level. And so Ken Holland goes, it's worth the cap hit. We aren't going to have Clefbaum anyways, so that frees up $4 million. So it's only a $1.5 million difference between having Clefbaum in the lineup or having Keith. And I know it's not that simple. And I know people are going to pull out their abacuses and try to prove that all the numbers don't work. But again, that's how I see it that Ken Holland's thinking about it. Getting over the hump, I don't know how much of it is legit a culture problem. And I do wonder of the teams. So the Cup final droughts are interesting to me. The Islanders, it's been 36 seasons, but I think that's been tempered a bit by being in the Final Four the last 2 years. Now, if the Islanders fall out of the playoffs next year, which with the Metro, it's possible. Not probable, but it's possible. That would be then 37 years. And then we can have another discussion about how do they fix this? How do they make this work, right? It's been 19 seasons now for Colorado. Since they went to the finals, they won the Cup in 2021. And we're seeing those discussions with Colorado like, well, what do they need? Well, they have all these star players, but do they have that it factor? So recent Stanley Cup champions, 2020 and 2021, it's Tampa. I know people have complained about the over-the-cap bit, but what really put Tampa over the top in 2020 was picking up guys like Coleman and Gaudreau. And it's this quality in your bottom six, it's this quality throughout your lineup that can make that difference. And it's funny because 2019, they get swept in the first round by Columbus. Everybody's laughing at them. And Tampa, to their credit, they laughed along, except Vasilevsky. There was no laughing from Andrei Vasilevsky. If he could have produced lasers with his eyes, everybody at that award show would have been in some serious pain. I'm not saying he would have murdered anybody. He would have had his laser eyes on Cook a little bit. Just, not burn and to a cinder, but just, make them feel a little bit warm and toasty. And, Tampa Bay was kind of the butt of all the jokes in 2019. They had won so many games, they had this great team, and they flopped in the playoffs. 2020 and 2021, they went in the playoffs, and everybody goes, oh, they're over the cap, and this is just ridiculous, and nobody in Tampa used to care. And it is interesting because what I see with Tampa is a team that figured it out. And it is that quality that you can't really measure. Like, you can get all the charts to show that Tampa Bay players played very well through the playoffs. Absolutely agreed. You can get all the advanced stats, all the charts, all the expected goals for and everything to show you that Tampa was dominant in plenty of games. But there is that quality where, you know they're not going to blow the lead kind of thing. Where you know that when it's a big game and it's a high-pressure game, you're going to get the best out of these players. That up until 2019, there was some question. And that wasn't really fair either, because this was a team that was going to conference finals. They were in the Stanley Cup final in 2015. Couldn't get over the hump. So that culture question gets asked. 2019, your cup winner is St. Louis. Up until they won that cup in 2019, all the jokes about St. Louis and how they were never going to win a Stanley Cup, they were there. They were very prominent, and I never thought they were going to win a cup myself. Because, again, in the early 2000s, I thought they had the best team. There were certain years that with guys like McInnes and Hull and others and Pronger, and it felt like this is a team that should be able to win the cup, and then the playoffs would start and they're out. And they might be out early. They might lose to a team that finished way below them in the standings. And this is why when people say, well, that team doesn't belong in that round because they're not good enough. Yeah, but they beat a team that was supposed to be in this round. So if they weren't supposed to be here, that other team probably should have beaten them. And that's been an argument for a long time as well. But St. Louis gets over that hump in 2019 and they win the Stanley Cup. And yes, Pat Maroon is the absolute key for the Blues and then for Tampa. Sure, because I know somebody's going to say it in the comment section. I'll say it here now. And of course, in 2018, as I said, the Capitals, who maybe were one of the most frustrated teams in playoffs for decades, all of a sudden, they won a cup. And the interesting thing, too, is that 2020, there was discussions about whether or not the Capitals, the effort was there, the heart was there, right? The Bubbles playoffs, that maybe they never really checked in. There were questions about their determination as well in 2021, that against Boston, they just didn't seem engaged at times. Ovechkin was, but it seemed like at times his teammates weren't. But because they won that cup in 2018, it's not nearly as loud. You don't hear nearly as many complaints as you would if they had not won that cup in 2018. You don't hear the complaints about St. Louis as you would if they had lost in 2019. If the Jets knocked them out in 2019 in the first round, we'd be hearing a lot more complaints. One thing I've always said with Vancouver is it's a good thing they went on that finals run in 2011. I know everybody remembers, it ended in 7 games against Boston and they got destroyed by Boston and then this whole city's on fire and, that whole thing, right? But in reality, if Vancouver loses, let's just say Game 7 overtime against Chicago, a series they were up 3-0. If Chicago wins that game in overtime in Game 7, all we're talking about from then until now is how the Vancouver Canucks never got out of the second round with the Sedins, never got out of the second round with Luongo, that they choked every single year. Because of the 2011 Stanley Cup Finals run, they don't get into these kind of ugly-looking droughts, right? Where, their last Stanley Cup Final was in 1994, and they don't look like they're ever going back. So the concept of culture, I think, sometimes gets overstated. And I do sometimes think that teams go on runs that maybe mask that there are issues with that team. Not necessarily being the 2011 Canucks. The 2011 Canucks was an example of a team that finished first that managed to actually get to the Stanley Cup Final. But it is interesting, the idea of team culture. So, the question I have for people out there is, which team do you think needs a culture shift? Is it Calgary? Is it Minnesota? And with culture shift, which team needs that on the ice, and which team needs it in management? Which team do you think, you look at the management group and you go, you know what? This whole, the culture is, we're going to, like in Vancouver right now, the criticism is, Benning saying, we want to make the playoffs and build to being a contender. And Canuck fans answering with, why don't we just try to build a contender? And I can't disagree with that thinking. But I understand the idea too that as long as you get in the playoffs, you have a chance. But I do understand what people are saying. You want to build a middle-of-the-road team, or do you want to build a really good team? And when a GM goes, we just want to make the playoffs and we'll build to a contender later, it sounds like he's okay with mediocre now, looking at good later. And when you've been at your job for a long time, and you go out and you tell your boss, and the fans are kind of the boss, right? By the way, we're going to try to be mediocre soon. You've been here for 6 years. Why are you getting mediocre now? Shouldn't we be getting good at this by now? So it's a question mark. It really is. But if a team goes on a good run, if a team has a great season, suddenly management looks pretty smart, right? So that's the question. Culture around a team, because we're going to hear a lot of it over the summer. We're already hearing a bunch of it now. And which team do you think needs to change their culture? And which team do you think their winning culture is underrated? So which team do you think out of these 31 teams on the board has, a really good system, like maybe Carolina, where things are really good? Yeah, 15 years since they made it to the finals, but they've got a really good culture going there. Everybody's buying in, and they're going to have that breakthrough. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happen upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.